Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lanterns, let the shadows stretch across the timber beams, and wander into a moment that's both utterly ordinary and quietly terrifying: childbirth in the Middle Ages. The smell of smoke lingers in the rafters, straw crunches underfoot, and outside the wind sighs against the shutters, while inside, every heartbeat feels like it might be counted twice. You're going to sit at the edge of a narrow bed, knees drawn up, watching the flickering flame play across the anxious faces of women who've done this before. The truth is, you probably wouldn't survive this. Statistically speaking, pregnancy and childbirth were some of the most dangerous events in a medieval woman's life. But don't panic, because tonight you're just a ghostly observer, safe and comfortable. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it there right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a small town centuries ago, where gossip travels faster than the church bell tolls. A woman clutches her belly, and the neighbors whisper that her cravings for sour apples mean she's carrying a boy. Pregnancy omens are everywhere. Dreaming of fish is taken as sure proof of conception, while spotting a hare crossing the path might mean a child will be born with a cleft lip. It's not medical science as you know it, but a patchwork of folklore stitched together over generations. Her friends crowd close, murmuring that the shape of her belly leans forward, a sign of a son, or perhaps a warning of a difficult delivery. You notice how easily they mix hope with fear. A crooked candle flame becomes an omen. A sudden sneeze in church is whispered about for days. Even the stars overhead are consulted. Astrologers draw up charts for noblewomen, suggesting which saints to pray to, which days to avoid heavy lifting, and which planetary alignments hint at smooth births. In the corner of the room, a woman clutches a tiny pouch tied with red thread. Inside are dried herbs and maybe even a sliver of wolf bone. People believe these charms guard against miscarriage, or against the wicked gaze of the evil eye. Some families hang an iron key above the bed, convinced that demons, who hate metal, will be kept at bay. You can imagine medieval Instagram would have been full of blurry amulet photos and captioned with #babyblessings. Of course, not all omens are comforting. Spotting a raven circling overhead is seen as a dire warning, and many women won't dare step into graveyards while pregnant for fear that the dead might pull on the child's spirit. Historians still argue whether such fears were truly universal or whether they were more common among peasants, while elites cloak their anxieties in religious language. As the months go on, her cravings turn into ritualized warnings. She is told to avoid eating too much garlic, lest her child be born with bad breath forever. She's warned against walking under ladders or weaving too much wool, as those acts could somehow tangle the baby inside. The strangest tidbit? Some medieval texts suggest that if a pregnant woman gazes too long at a deformed animal, her baby might take on its likeness. It sounds absurd now, but back then, the boundaries between imagination and biology blurred easily. There's also a social side to all of this. Neighbors lean in with advice whether asked for or not. A mother-in-law might scold the expectant woman for sitting too much, "You'll make the child lazy." Another insists she must keep cheerful, since sadness could seep into the child's spirit. Every action is scrutinized, every sign noted, until you realize that pregnancy wasn't just physical, it was communal surveillance. When night falls, she kneels before a small icon of the Virgin Mary. A whispered prayer slips from her lips, asking not just for a safe birth but for protection against unseen forces that might steal her milk or twist the baby in her womb. The candlelight softens, and you feel how fragile and hopeful the atmosphere becomes. Pregnancy here is less about certainty and more about surviving superstition, enduring neighbors' endless commentary, and clinging to charms that might be nothing more than polished stones wrapped in twine. Yet, despite all the uncertainty, there's also resilience. Women laugh off the most ridiculous omens, teasing each other about craving onions or suddenly growing thick hair. They create a shared culture of pregnancy stories, a way to hold on to control in a world where control is nearly impossible. You watch the expectant mother smile faintly as another woman says, "If your nose spreads wide, it means the baby is stealing your beauty." The room chuckles, easing the tension for a moment. And so, you sit there, surrounded by candlelight, smoke, whispers, and trinkets of faith, realizing that pregnancy in medieval times was never just about biology, it was about carrying the weight of omens, fears, and hopes, all tangled together in the straw-scented air. You linger in the hush of that candlelit room, and soon the door creaks open. In steps a woman with sleeves rolled up, apron stained with herbs, and eyes that carry both kindness and exhaustion. She's the midwife, the figure every community whispers about with equal parts reverence and suspicion. She knows more about women's bodies than the priests do, though she'd never dare say it aloud. To most, she's simply a wise woman, trained not in books but in memory, observation, and dozens of deliveries witnessed by the firelight. You watch as she lays out her tools on a low wooden table. There's no shiny metal kit, no sterile packaging, just bundles of herbs tied with string, a knife with a worn handle. Wax candles, strips of linen, and a bottle of something strong that smells like it could strip paint. She doesn't have gloves, of course, those won't be common for centuries. Instead, she rubs her hands with rosemary and sage, muttering a small prayer as if that alone might keep unseen sickness at bay. Historians still argue whether these rituals were more about faith than hygiene, or whether midwives, through trial and error, really did understand which herbs carried antiseptic properties. You notice the respect she commands. The pregnant woman's family listens as she explains that Saint Margaret of Antioch, the patron saint of childbirth, must be invoked. She pulls out a small booklet with faded ink, full of prayers and chants that she has memorized long ago. Some of her words blur between Latin and local dialect, half understood by the family but believed in fully. You realize she's not just a healer, she's part doctor, part priestess, part therapist, part myth keeper. Still, not everyone trusts her. You hear the older neighbor whispering that too much knowledge of birth smacks of witchcraft. A woman who knows how to deliver breech babies or how to ease contractions with poppy seeds can easily become a target when crops fail or livestock die. It's a risky business, being skilled. One successful delivery and you're praised, one death, and suddenly the devil's name might be tied to yours. She pulls a pouch from her apron and tips it onto the table. Dried chamomile, mint, fennel, and a pinch of rue tumble out. These are steeped into teas to calm nerves, settle stomachs, and sometimes to quicken the womb. The smell fills the small room, earthy and bittersweet. She also has a small jar of honey to sweeten the bitterest concoctions. Medieval medicine always came with a side of culinary compromise. You also notice something less practical but equally important, a small carved amulet in the shape of a key. She places it under the bed, muttering that locked doors keep out evil spirits. Whether you believe in demons or not, you can't deny the comfort the gesture provides. After all, who doesn't like the idea of bad things being locked outside? As the minutes stretch into hours, the midwife keeps her focus. She massages the woman's hands, rubs oil across her belly, and leads her through whispered prayers. She tells her to grip a wooden rod tied to the bedpost, to focus her energy, to keep pushing when the time comes. Every action has layers, part physical relief, part spiritual safeguard, part community ritual. Not all attendants were midwives, though. Sometimes wise women were more herbalists than birth specialists. They'd be summoned for their potions rather than their skills in the birthing room itself. One such recipe, written in a dusty medieval text, called for mixing ground pearls into wine to strengthen the mother, luxurious and utterly impractical for anyone but nobility. You chuckle, imagining the local brewer shaking his head at peasants asking for pearl-flavored ale. Doctors, when they did appear, often brought tension with them. Learned men from universities looked down on midwives, branding them as ignorant. Yet ironically, these men were rarely present at actual births. Male physicians typically stepped in only when things went very wrong, usually too late. You see how the midwife carries the weight of responsibility quietly, knowing that when a baby survives, the mother's thanks are whispered to her. But when tragedy strikes, blame lands heavily on her shoulders. A quirky tidbit you overhear: some midwives carried scissors shaped like tiny fish. The symbolism was that fish lived in water, and babies, too, floated in the watery world of the womb. Cutting with fish-shaped blades was supposed to bring good fortune, though you suspect the actual cutting edge mattered more than the shape. All around you, the room grows warmer. The fire pops, shadows dance, and the midwife hums under her breath, an old lullaby, perhaps, or maybe just a rhythm to keep herself steady. You notice how her presence shifts the mood. What was fear becomes routine. What was chaos becomes process. This is the quiet power of someone who has seen dozens, maybe hundreds, of babies enter the world, and as the pregnant woman leans back, groaning softly, the midwife adjusts her herbs, checks her breathing, and prepares the family for the long hours ahead. You feel it keenly, in this moment. She's the center of the universe, holding life and death between her calloused hands, armed with nothing more than plans, prayers, and the stubborn persistence of generations before her. The room darkens as another candle is lit, and you notice how the midwife starts giving quiet orders. Someone closes the shutters, too much moonlight is thought unlucky. Another places a woolen cloth across the threshold, to keep wandering spirits from slipping inside. This isn't just any space now. It has been transformed into a birthing chamber, part sanctuary, part fortress, where a woman will face the greatest trial of her life surrounded by ritual. You glance around. The walls are hung with talismans, a small wooden cross, a sprig of juniper, a tiny pouch of salt. A knife rests under the mattress, edge turned outward, because metal is thought to repel evil. Someone has even drawn a chalk circle near the hearth to trap spirits that might try to creep in. It looks almost like stage setting for a medieval horror film, yet here, it's meant to soothe. Historians still argue whether these protections were sincerely believed in or whether they served more as comfort rituals, like modern good luck charms. The air is thick with smoke from the fire and incense from the church. A priest may have been here earlier to bless the room, sprinkling holy water in the corners and muttering verses from the Psalms. The smell lingers, mingling with beeswax candles and the sharp tang of dried herbs. You breathe in and it almost feels medicinal, though your modern brain knows most of it is psychological rather than chemical. The bed itself is arranged carefully. Fresh straw stuffed into the mattress, clean linen sheets prepared, or as clean as one could hope for in the 14th century. A red cloth is spread across the foot of the bed, symbolizing protection, though it also doubles as a practical covering for the mess to come. You think about how this moment is caught between symbolism and survival, comfort and necessity. Not every woman lies in bed, though. Sometimes the birthing chamber is arranged around a stool or chair specially designed with a hole in the seat, allowing gravity to do some of the work. Ropes hang from the rafters for gripping, and stools are placed nearby for attendants to sit close, ready to catch the child. A birth stool might look crude to modern eyes, but in many ways it was practical, far more ergonomic than lying flat on a bed. A quirky detail: some stools were carved with little animal figures, meant to encourage fertility and safe delivery. You can picture a midwife patting a carved lion for luck before coaxing a mother to sit. As you observe, the women of the household cluster in the corners. Men are largely absent. Childbirth here is a women's world, private and guarded. Only in rare cases, and usually only among royalty, would men, whether physicians or clerics, be allowed inside. Here, sisters, aunts, neighbors, and sometimes even children hover, whispering prayers, fetching water, and clutching rosaries. You sense the communal weight of it all. This isn't a solitary ordeal, it's a ritual shared by a circle of women, each one remembering her own past labors or anticipating future ones. A debate rumbles quietly under the surface: should windows be opened to let in fresh air, or kept sealed to block wandering spirits? One woman insists the room must stay warm, because drafts could harm both mother and child. Another swears that too much heat makes labor harder. You smile, realizing arguments about the right atmosphere during birth haven't really changed much in 700 years. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed childbirth was safer in closed rooms or whether it was just another superstition passed down unquestioned. Someone pours warm ale into a cup, mixes in a spoonful of honey, and hands it to the expectant mother. The drink is supposed to calm her, strengthen her, maybe dull the edge of pain just a little. Beside the bed, a bowl of blessed water waits, ready to baptize the infant immediately in case of danger. That urgency says everything. Survival isn't assumed, and the line between life and death could be crossed in minutes. You catch sight of the family's prized relic, perhaps a tiny bone of some obscure saint, tied with ribbon and hung above the bed. It's less about the object itself than the belief it carries. In a world without anesthesia or sterile wards, faith becomes the medicine of last resort. You can imagine the comfort it gives, like a favorite song played before surgery today. The hours drag on. The candles burn lower. You notice how the women keep the rhythm of the room steady. One recites prayers, another rubs the mother's back, another stirs the fire. The chamber becomes a world unto itself, cut off from the streets outside, from the markets and gossip and clanging bells. Inside, everything narrows to one point, the effort of bringing forth life, and yet, it's not just solemn. There's nervous laughter when the midwife reminds the mother to curse her husband's name. It's practically tradition. Someone makes a joke about how at least the baby will have strong lungs if it screams as loud as its mother. In the middle of fear, humor peeks in, because laughter, like ritual, makes the unbearable just a little lighter. As you lean back in your chair, lulled by the chanting and the crackle of the fire, you realize you're watching more than just a birth. You're witnessing how an ordinary medieval household turned superstition, faith, and community into armor against uncertainty. The birthing room is a stage, the rituals are the script, and everyone inside plays their role in hopes of a safe final act. The hours stretch longer, and the rhythm of the birthing room changes. The woman's groans deepen, her breathing ragged. You feel the air thicken with tension, as if every person in the room inhales together each time a contraction begins. It's not like a modern hospital with monitors and beeping machines. Here, the only signals are the flush of her face, the clutch of her hands, the rise of sweat on her brow. Her prayers begin to tumble out between gasps. Holy Mary, Mother of God. She whispers, clutching at a rosary. Sometimes the words crumble into half-formed bargains with the saints, promises to light candles for Saint Margaret, to make offerings at the shrine if only this child comes safely. You notice that no one mocks her for pleading out loud. In fact, everyone joins in, their murmured prayers layering into a hushed chorus, filling the dim chamber with a sound that is both hopeful and desperate. Pain is the center of it all. No epidurals, no nitrous oxide, just raw endurance. The midwife rubs her back with oils of rue and marjoram, hoping the warmth will soothe. A hot cloth is pressed against her belly, though whether it eases or worsens the pain is hard to tell. Some women were given small sips of wine, sometimes mixed with opiates if the family had the means, but here it's likely just ale, strong enough to dull her nerves but never enough to knock her unconscious. You can't help but think of how terrifying it must be, knowing that every scream echoes a risk of death, and yet, there are rituals for even this. A book of medieval remedies once suggested tying a piece of parchment with holy verses around the mother's thigh. Supposedly, the word itself would hasten delivery. Another odd tidbit, some midwives whispered that placing the mother's girdle, belt, of Saint Margaret across her belly could untie the womb. Whether superstition or placebo, these tokens gave women something to cling to, even as the contractions made them cry out. You glance at the midwife's face. She stays calm, though you sense the calculation in her eyes. She times the contractions by instinct, listens to the rhythm of the woman's cries, watches for signs of exhaustion. Her hands are ready, her voice steady, even as sweat beads at her temples. She tells the laboring mother to grip the rope tied to the ceiling beam, to let her body sway with the pain. The motion gives her something to do, a way to channel the force that threatens to overwhelm her. Sometimes the prayers shift from saints to saints' relics. Someone presses a small reliquary to the mother's lips, letting her kiss the tiny fragment of bone inside. Another places a cross against her palm, so she can grip it instead of digging her nails into her own skin. You notice how much of this ritual is about touch, holding, pressing, grounding, because words alone can't carry the weight of such pain. Still, the atmosphere isn't pure solemnity. One woman mutters that the louder she screams, the healthier the child will be, as if volume translates to vitality. Another chuckles quietly, saying at least the neighbors will know she's not dying in silence. Jokes like this are half defense, half tradition. They create small sparks of humanity in a moment that otherwise feels like endless struggle. Historians still argue whether medieval women experienced childbirth more stoically than modern ones. Whether constant exposure to hardship hardened them, or whether they expressed pain more freely in private. Judging by this room, you suspect both are true. The groans are raw, but so is the resilience, as if each wave of agony is met with an equally stubborn will not to collapse. The hours drag into night. The fire burns low. Someone stirs the coals, the faint red glow flickering across tired faces. Every contraction feels like a storm crashing through the room, then ebbing just long enough to let everyone breathe before the next one builds. The cycle is relentless, like waves against a shore that won't retreat. At one point, the midwife raises her hand for silence. She leans close, listening not just to the woman's cries but to the baby's movements, trying to gauge position with her bare hands. No stethoscopes, no ultrasounds, just intuition and experience. She nods slowly, mutters something about patience, and the room exhales together. You find yourself gripping your own knees. As if you too are waiting, suspended in that fragile balance. The prayers, the groans, the whispered reassurances all blur together into a single hum, like a lullaby written in pain. And as the night stretches on, you realize this is what labor was for medieval women, a test of endurance wrapped in faith, woven with fear, tempered with fleeting moments of humor, and held together by the presence of others who had walked this path before. The hours wear on, and the midwife finally gestures for the birthing stool to be set in place. It's a curious thing, 3 legs, a broad wooden seat, and a wide opening cut in the middle. At first glance, it looks a little like a rustic commode, but here it's a throne of sorts, the chair where life enters the world. You watch as 2 attendants grip the laboring woman's arms, steadying her as she lowers herself carefully onto the stool. Her feet press against the packed earth floor, knees bent wide, shoulders braced. Gravity is suddenly her ally. Unlike lying flat on a bed, which physicians later insisted upon, the stool lets her body work with the contractions. A rope dangles from the rafters above, worn smooth from dozens of hands gripping it in this same ritual. She clutches it, pulling down with every surge, eyes squeezed shut, knuckles white. The midwife crouches between her legs, poised and ready, her expression calm despite the sweat dripping down her temples. You notice how everyone shifts with the change of posture. The stool has transformed the room again. The attendants lean close, whispering encouragement. One rubs her shoulders. Another fans her with a bit of cloth. The rhythm of labor becomes a chorus, her groans, the murmured prayers, the crackle of fire, the occasional slap of water ladled into a basin. A quirky detail slips into the scene. Some birthing stools were carved with symbolic figures. Fertility goddesses, animals like rabbits, even geometric patterns meant to channel life energy. It sounds mystical, yet it also gave women something to focus on as they bore down, eyes darting to the carvings in moments of pain. Imagine staring at a carved rabbit's ears, thinking, "Be as fruitful as this creature," while your whole body clenches in agony. The stool isn't the only position tried. Some women kneel on mats, gripping a bed frame or leaning against another woman's chest. Others squat, balancing with surprising strength. The midwife decides what works best, shifting strategies depending on how the baby is moving. Historians still argue whether medieval midwives truly understood the mechanics of childbirth in a scientific sense, or whether their knowledge was simply trial and error passed down by observation. Watching her hands guide the mother, you'd say it's both. Between pushes, the woman collapses back into the arms of her attendants, panting, sweat glistening on her forehead. Someone presses a cool cloth to her lips. Another adjusts the rope so she can grip it tighter for the next wave. You sense the unity of it all. This isn't one woman giving birth, it's a group effort, each participant lending strength in small, necessary ways. Not all households had stools, of course. For peasants, a straw pallet or even bare earth often had to suffice. But where stools existed, they were prized tools, sometimes passed down through families or shared among neighbors. A stool was as much a community resource as a plow or a millstone, its purpose sacred, its value undeniable. A humorous aside floats through the tension. One of the older women mutters, "Best to push hard, before the rope gives way," and a ripple of chuckles softens the edges of fear. You can almost imagine medieval memes. POV, you're gripping the birthing rope and hoping the carpenter tightened the beams. Humor here is not disrespect, but survival. You also notice how the stool changes the midwife's role. Squatting low, she is eye level with the mystery itself, relying on sight, touch, and instinct to guide the baby safely through. Her hands move with practiced confidence, though you know in truth she can do little more than coax nature along. The birthing stool magnifies her importance. Without her there to catch, the process becomes perilous. Some say the stool symbolized female power, a throne reserved for one of life's most profound acts. Others argue it was simply pragmatic carpentry. Historians still debate whether its use declined under pressure from male physicians who preferred women to labor flat on beds, an arrangement that gave doctors easier access but stripped away centuries of tradition. For now, though, in this flickering chamber, the stool reigns supreme. Every groan, every pull of the rope, every whispered Ave Maria draws the room tighter together. You can almost feel the baby edging closer with each shudder of the woman's body. The stool creaks under her weight, the rope sways, and the midwife leans forward, ready, and you, perched in the shadows, realize this simple wooden seat is more than furniture. It's a relic of endurance, a reminder that childbirth here is not a passive ordeal but an active battle, fought with ropes, stools, hands, prayers, sweat, and the unyielding will to bring forth new life. The stool creaks again, the rope sways, and the midwife gestures for another cup to be brought forward. This one smells different, sharper, earthier, almost unpleasant. A hot brew of herbs steams in the firelight, thick with roots and leaves steeped until the water darkens. The woman grimaces but sips anyway, her lips stained by the bitter drink. You lean closer and catch the scents, fennel for digestion, chamomile to soothe, a dash of mugwort to stir the womb. Medieval birthing relied as much on potions as on prayer, with recipes passed down through generations like family secrets. You hear whispers about other mixtures. Honeyed ale laced with sage, believed to give strength. Clary wine, to open the body. Poppy juice, if one could afford it, to dull pain and blur the edges of reality. It's easy to imagine that sometimes the line between medicine and intoxication grew fuzzy. After all, if you were in labor for hours, even drunken relief might feel like divine mercy. Historians still argue whether such remedies truly helped or merely gave the illusion of help, but you can't deny the psychological power of believing in them. The amulets return, too. One woman ties a strip of cloth around the mother's wrist, embroidered with the words Ave Maria. Another presses a carved charm into her palm, a tiny figure of a saint, polished from years of handling. These talismans are as much medicine as the herbal drinks, anchoring her spirit in something tangible. You notice how she clings to the charm between contractions, as though gripping it could keep her tethered to life. not all charms are holy, though. In some places, a hare's foot is tied above the bed, or a wolf's tooth is placed near the stool. The logic? The hare is fertile, the wolf fierce, and perhaps their essence might seep into the child's fate. A quirky tidbit tells of women tying iron keys or even knives to their clothing, believing the sharp edge would cut the pain or slice away bad spirits. You can't help but smirk at the thought of laboring with a kitchen knife tucked into your waistband for luck. The midwife, ever practical, has her own remedies. She dips her hands in a bowl of warm water infused with rosemary before touching the laboring woman. The scent fills the room, fresh and resinous, and you realize this might not just be ritual, it probably reduced the worst of the germs, too. She smears a paste of honey and vinegar on a cloth, pressing it against the woman's lips, claiming it will give her strength. And for a moment, the mother seems steadier, as if the sweetness itself carried courage, yet danger is never far. Some remedies could be risky. Too much opium, and the mother might drift too far into unconsciousness. Too much mugwort, and the womb might contract too violently. Even the most careful midwife balanced on a knife's edge, measuring herbs by pinches, trusting her memory more than any written recipe. You realize how fragile the line was between healing and harm. Amid the pain, the midwife whispers charms under her breath. Words blur into a mix of prayer and spell, invoking saints but also weaving in old pagan phrases that the church never quite stamped out. One rhyme you overhear calls on the moon to loosen the child. As if lunar cycles still tugged on human wombs. The mixture of sacred and folk magic is seamless, no one here sees a contradiction. The laboring woman cries out again, clutching the rope, sweat dripping down her face. Between contractions, she takes another gulp of the bitter brew, her grimace followed by a shudder. It's not pleasant, but it gives her something to focus on besides the pain. And maybe, just maybe, it works. In the corner, you notice a pile of odd little objects waiting their turn, a ring said to have touched a holy relic, a scrap of parchment with verses scrawled in uneven Latin, a sprig of vervain tied with red string. One by one, they'll be pressed into her hands or laid on her body. It's as though every possible layer of protection is piled on top of her, herbs, relics, charms, whispered words, because no one knows which one will tip the balance toward life, and yet, despite the superstition, there's a strange logic beneath it. The herbs soothe. The charms comfort. The rituals give order to chaos. Even if they don't guarantee survival, they create a rhythm, a sense of agency in a world where women so often had none. The contraction passes, the room breathes again, and you realize, this blend of bitter brews and talismans isn't foolishness. It's resilience. It's women arming themselves with whatever weapons they can muster, whether plant, prayer, or polished charm, to face the most perilous battle of their lives. The fire crackles low, its glow casting shadows against the stone walls, when the door opens just enough for another figure to slip inside. This time, not a midwife or relative, but a man in dark robes carrying a leather satchel. A physician. His presence shifts the air, the women stiffening slightly. You can feel the tension ripple through the room, the kind of unease that comes when two worlds collide. For centuries, childbirth has belonged to women, mothers, grandmothers, midwives, healers. Men were kept out, both for reasons of modesty and because, truthfully, they could do little to help. But now, with universities rising across Europe and medicine gaining prestige, physicians begin intruding into this most intimate of spaces. Learned, Latin-speaking, and carrying books filled with theories of Galen and Hippocrates, they often viewed the wisdom of midwives as little more than superstition. And yet, here he stands, summoned perhaps because the birth drags on too long. You watch as he unpacks instruments that gleam in the firelight. Forceps, two long metal arms designed to grip the infant's head. A speculum of bone or brass, meant to peer inside. The midwives exchange uneasy glances, they've seen how clumsy hands can harm as much as help. But the family watches with hope, desperate for any sign that this learned man might rescue mother and child. The clash is more than medical, it's social, even spiritual. The midwives work with herbs, prayers, and charms. The doctor speaks of humors, of balancing heat and cold, dryness and wetness in the body. He talks about how the womb is like an oven, needing the right conditions to bake the child properly. His tone is authoritative, his confidence absolute, though you can't help but wonder how much he truly understands of what unfolds before him. The midwife defers, reluctantly, but she doesn't leave. Instead, she hovers close, ready to step back in when theory falters. You realize this isn't just about the birth, it's about power. Midwives, often illiterate but vastly experienced, carried authority rooted in the community's trust. Physicians, by contrast, sought to professionalize medicine, to pull it out of women's hands and into the realm of universities and guilds. The stakes stretch far beyond this one laboring mother. You notice the laboring woman's face, pale, sweating, anxious at the sight of the strange tools. To her, the midwife is comfort, a familiar figure who has attended dozens of births. The physician is distant. His voice clinical, his touch unfamiliar. Between contractions, she murmurs a prayer, clinging to her talisman harder than ever. When he attempts to use the forceps, the midwife places a steadying hand on his arm, guiding him more gently. Their eyes meet, a silent argument. He bristles, but he listens, perhaps sensing that her practiced hands know the rhythms of childbirth better than his books. In this uneasy partnership, you see the fragile beginnings of modern obstetrics, born from conflict between male knowledge and female tradition. Outside this room, the broader world debates. In some cities, physicians petition councils to ban unlicensed midwives, branding them ignorant or even dangerous. In response, communities defend their trusted women, insisting that no university-trained man could match their practical wisdom. The church too interferes, demanding that midwives swear oaths not to harm infants, not to secretly kill them in baptism, not to dabble in forbidden charms. Suspicion lurks at every corner. Back at the hearth, the physician steps aside, muttering about humors and imbalance. The midwife resumes her work, steady and sure, wiping the mother's brow, whispering encouragement, pressing her hands firmly against the straining belly. The women in the room lean toward her, not him, as though instinctively knowing where the true source of strength lies. It strikes you that this tension, between learned men and practical women, isn't just about childbirth. It's about who controls knowledge, who defines authority, who gets to speak for life itself. For now, in this chamber, the midwife still reigns, though shadows of change creep closer. As another contraction racks the mother's body, you see clearly, this isn't merely a struggle against pain and danger, but also against a shifting tide of power that will echo through generations. The chamber is heavy with the scent of sweat and smoke when the midwife suddenly stiffens. She's seen enough births to recognize when something is wrong. You glance at the mother and notice it too. Her body writhes with effort, but the baby does not descend as expected. A whisper ripples through the women, breach. The child is coming feet first, and the room tightens with dread. Medieval people often saw such births as more than medical mishaps. To them, an upside-down entry into the world suggested destiny bent askew. Some whispered that breech babies were marked for trouble, destined for restless lives or unnatural deaths. And then there are twins. If two infants appeared, the villagers outside would gossip for weeks, wondering if the mother had been touched by divine blessing or something darker. Historians still argue whether twins were more often celebrated or feared, but what's clear is that these births always drew notice. The midwife acts quickly, sliding her hands with practiced steadiness. She murmurs encouragement, though sweat beads on her forehead. A breech birth can mean suffocation for the child, tearing and exhaustion for the mother. You sense the stakes, almost feel the room hold its breath. The physician from earlier shifts nervously in the corner, perhaps realizing that his instruments are useless against the unpredictability of life turned sideways, if the child emerges alive. It's hailed as near miraculous. Yet, if not, the blame may fall heavily on the mother's sins, on the midwife's supposed incompetence, or even on unseen spirits. In some chronicles, women accused of witchcraft were linked to repeated stillbirths or difficult labors, as if their very presence warped nature's design. It's an unfair weight, one that makes every push feel like a gamble with reputation as much as survival. Through the thin walls, you can imagine neighbors waiting, ears straining for a newborn's cry. Every extra hour of labor breeds rumor. Maybe the baby is deformed, maybe it's a monster, maybe God himself is punishing this household. And while most of these whispers are just fearful nonsense, they linger like smoke, staining the family standing long after the child's first breath, or silence. You realize how fragile everything is here. In an age without surgical options, without anesthesia, even the simplest birth teeters on the edge. When something unusual happens, people reach for explanations that blend medicine, magic, and morality. A breech birth isn't just a medical emergency. It's a story that will be told, reshaped, and remembered, shaping how both mother and child are seen. At last, the midwife coaxes, prays, and pulls with delicate strength. Whether the baby's first cry fills the room or not, you understand the tension that medieval women lived under. Birth was never routine, it was always a brush with mystery, danger, and the unknown. And tonight, as the fire burns low, you sense how every child's entrance carried not only life but a shadow of fate. The fire burns lower, and you feel the shift in the room as hope dims. The midwife's hands move slower now, not from lack of skill, but because the outcome is slipping beyond her reach. The laboring mother gasps in exhaustion, and when the silence falls after one final push, it's not the silence of peace, it's the silence of absence. No cry. No squirm. Just stillness. You can almost hear the weight of it pressing on everyone. The midwife gently wraps the tiny body in linen, her face lined with sorrow. She knows this ritual all too well. For medieval families, stillbirth was not rare, it was a familiar grief that visited nearly every household sooner or later. And yet, each time, it was devastating. A lost child wasn't simply a private sorrow but a theological puzzle, a social burden, and sometimes even a scandal. The church taught that unbaptized infants could not enter heaven, their souls forever barred from salvation. So when a baby was born lifeless, parents were left tormented. Where did their child's spirit go? Some whispered about limbo, a shadow realm not of torment but not of bliss either. Others believed God's mercy might still embrace the innocent. Historians still argue whether ordinary people truly feared for their infants' eternal fate or quietly trusted in compassion beyond doctrine. You noticed the midwife's subtle movements. Sometimes, if there was even the faintest flicker of breath, she would rush to sprinkle holy water and mutter the baptismal words, desperate to grant the child a place in heaven. In some regions, even if the infant was clearly stillborn, there were tales of emergency baptisms whispered over cold lips, just in case. The line between hope and ritual blurred in these moments. The family reacts differently, some wail openly, clutching at each other, while others retreat into stunned silence. You realize how grief was expressed in ways that depended not only on the individual but also on custom. In some households, mourning was loud and ritualized, with neighbors rushing in to help bury quickly before decay set in. In others, grief was hushed, private, almost hidden, as though speaking of it too much might invite more misfortune. The burial itself was complicated. If the priest allowed, the infant might be placed in consecrated ground, but often, unbaptized babies were excluded. Some were buried at the edge of cemeteries, near hedges or crossroads, liminal spaces where the sacred and the profane met. A few parents, unwilling to accept this, buried secretly near churches at night, hoping proximity to holy ground would protect their child. The midwife wipes her hands, though her eyes betray the heaviness inside her. For her, too, this is more than just another part of her work. Every stillbirth carried risk to her reputation. Some would whisper that she had failed, that her herbs or methods were wrong. In darker cases, neighbors might accuse her of witchcraft, claiming she had stolen the child's life for some sinister purpose. The unfairness of this hangs over her like smoke clinging to cloth, yet, despite the grief, life continues. The mother must rest, heal, and often, try again. You imagine the quiet ache that lingers long after, the absence in the cradle, the silence during lullabies never sung. And you sense how these losses shaped medieval families, giving them both resilience and fear. Weaving sorrow into the very rhythm of life, for a moment, you feel the hush in the room, as if everyone is waiting for a sound that will never come. And in that silence, you understand, childbirth in this age was not just about beginnings, it was also about endings, carried out under the watchful eyes of faith, superstition, and community judgment. The night stretches on, and the laboring woman, now resting after her harrowing ordeal, is attended quietly by the midwife. The baby's absence has left a space in the room, a hush broken only by whispered prayers and the occasional creak of the timber floor. You notice how the midwife moves with deliberate care, checking the mother's pulse, gently rubbing her back, and adjusting the blankets so she can rest. Recovery begins not with fanfare, but with small, deliberate acts. You realize how different postpartum care was from modern practices. There are no nurses, no IVs, no monitored vitals. Instead, the mother relies on the midwife's experience, herbal tonics, and the wisdom of women who have carried children before her. Hot compresses of wine and herbs are applied to ease cramping, while teas of chamomile and fennel are sipped slowly to soothe the stomach and calm nerves. A quirky touch, sometimes, a mixture of crushed lettuce and honey is spread on the belly to encourage the womb to shrink, a practice you'd probably not find in today's maternity ward. Visitors are kept at bay. Men remain outside, giving the mother privacy, while female relatives provide the rest and company needed to recover. You notice the delicate choreography. Someone fans the air to prevent chills, another fetches water, yet another keeps the fire going. Everything is about restoring strength and protecting the mother from illness. Fever, infection, or even faint drafts could prove fatal. Historians still argue whether these practices were born of superstition or practical observation, or some combination of both, but clearly, they mattered. Meanwhile, the surviving community carries on its quiet rituals of support. Neighbors bring food, usually hearty stews or porridge, often spiced with protective herbs like sage or rosemary. Small amulets might be gifted, pressed into the mother's hand to guard her recovery and to celebrate the baby that came safely, if one did. These gestures, simple as they seem, are woven into the social fabric, reinforcing bonds that are as important for survival as the midwife's expertise. You notice that certain superstitions continue even after birth. If a baby survives, it is common to wait a few days before naming it, to see if the child lives past the precarious early period. Some families place charms over the cradle or hang herbs by the window to ward off evil spirits. In rare cases, a scrap of cloth from a saint's robe is tied to the infant's wrist. All of this is less about fantasy and more about control, humans striving to make sense of uncertainty. One peculiar tidbit: in some regions, midwives or mothers would whisper protective charms over the baby while rocking it, sometimes using rhymes or nonsense words believed to confuse malevolent forces. You imagine the soft rhythm of the rocking cradle, punctuated by murmured syllables whose meanings might be lost to modern ears. Yet for those women, every syllable carries the weight of hope and protection. As the mother rests, the midwife prepares instructions for the days ahead. She advises on diet, hygiene, and how to recognize danger signs, excessive bleeding, fever, or unusual discharge. She reminds the mother to keep the infant close, to nurse often, and to be mindful of any subtle cues that might signal illness. These instructions, though simple, are life-saving, because even minor missteps can have deadly consequences in a world without antibiotics. You notice how the room has shifted in mood. Earlier tension and fear give way to quiet vigilance, punctuated by soft laughter or whispered reassurances. Every act now is slower, gentler, filled with the knowledge that the danger has passed but not entirely disappeared. The room is a sanctuary, a liminal space between life and death, fear and relief, past tradition and the hope for survival, and as you settle into the shadows, observing, you understand that the work of childbirth extends far beyond the act itself. Recovery, observation, and ritual form a continuum, connecting the mother, child, and community in a delicate web of care that has been honed over centuries. It's exhausting, fragile, and profoundly human. The dawn begins to filter through the shuttered windows, casting pale light across the room, and you notice how the energy inside has shifted. The tension of labor has eased into the measured rhythm of postpartum care. The midwife moves quietly, checking the mother's pulse, ensuring the linens are dry and comfortable, and sprinkling fresh herbs around the room to encourage clean air. Even the simplest tasks carry a ritualized weight, as if the act of tending itself wards off lingering danger. You notice the mother's exhaustion. Her body is slick with sweat, muscles sore from hours of strain, yet her expression is softened by relief. The midwife encourages her to sip warm broth, thick with grains and honey, designed to replenish strength. In some households, women also receive a small bowl of warm milk infused with rue or chamomile to encourage lactation. The combination of nutrition, herbs, and rest forms a practical foundation for recovery. Historians still argue whether such remedies had measurable medical benefits or functioned mainly as psychological support, but either way, they were essential to survival. The baby, if present and breathing, is swaddled carefully in soft linen, pressed close to the mother for warmth. Breastfeeding begins almost immediately, guided by the midwife's patient instructions. You observe the gentle choreography, hands supporting the infant, lips guided to the nipple, eyes meeting in that first fragile connection. Nursing is more than sustenance, it's protection against disease and a crucial tie to life itself, vital in a world where infant mortality looms high. A quirky detail floats through the morning air. In some regions, midwives advised mothers to place a small piece of iron under the baby's pillow to keep away spirits, or to hang a sprig of rosemary over the cradle for health. You can't help but imagine a tiny infant staring up at a dangling sprig, oblivious to the centuries of superstition wrapped around its first hours. Yet these gestures provide reassurance, both for the mother and the household. The room is still, punctuated only by the soft gurgle of infants, the crackle of fire, and low murmurs. Female relatives move cautiously, fetching warm water, adjusting the mother's bedding, and whispering encouragement. Men remain outside, but their presence is felt in the preparations they made: food, firewood, and occasionally, whispered advice. The community's support extends beyond the room, a latticework of protection, vigilance, and shared responsibility. You notice the midwife takes a quiet moment for herself. She washes her hands in fresh water, breathes deeply, and straightens the herbs for the next call. Her work does not end here. In days to come, she will return to check on the mother and child, offer guidance on nutrition, and administer additional herbal treatments if needed. In a way, she is both a healer and a lifeline, linking this small household to the larger web of experience and knowledge that has kept families alive for generations. Even as relief settles in, caution remains. The early days are critical. Bleeding, infection, or fever could strike without warning. You can sense the vigilance in the air, the way each step, each sip of broth, each swaddling motion is measured, deliberate, protective. Survival is never assumed, it is nurtured through care, attention, and centuries of inherited wisdom. And as you watch, you realize that this quiet rhythm, this careful tending, is an essential part of childbirth. Labor is not a single act but a continuum, stretching from the first contraction to the last swallow of broth, from the initial cry to the tentative grasp of a tiny hand. It is communal, ritualized, and profoundly human, a dance with life itself, guided by experience, faith, and a stubborn insistence on survival. By mid-morning, the household begins to settle into a fragile new normal. The laboring mother rests on a straw-stuffed mattress, still flushed with exertion but gradually regaining color. You notice the quiet attentiveness of the attendants, every movement is careful, designed to avoid startling her, to protect both mother and child. The midwife kneels nearby, occasionally checking the newborn's warmth and breathing, whispering encouragement both to the infant and the mother. Nutrition is central to recovery. The mother is offered broth thick with oats, a few eggs if the household can spare them, and a drizzle of honey for energy. In wealthier homes, porridge might be enriched with almonds or spices. Even the simplest meals carry medicinal intent, fennel and cumin to ease digestion, chamomile to calm the mind, and occasionally a touch of wine to fortify the blood. You realize how intertwined sustenance and ritual are, food as both survival and symbolic care. Historians still argue whether these dietary practices had measurable effects or were mainly intended to provide comfort, but their importance cannot be denied. Meanwhile, the midwife instructs the mother on hygiene. She shows how to cleanse herself with warm water, how to bandage any tears, and how to maintain cleanliness around the infant. You note the care in her movements. This is an age before antiseptics, so even small actions could mean the difference between health and infection. Every step, every gesture, is informed by centuries of observation. The baby is swaddled snugly, its tiny limbs bound close to conserve heat. You notice the rhythmic rocking of the cradle, a gentle motion that echoes the contractions of labor, soothing both mother and infant. A sprig of rosemary hangs nearby, an old superstition meant to keep spirits away and encourage vitality. Other charms, iron keys, small pouches of salt, or blessed ribbons, might be placed around the room. You can't help but smile at the array of protective measures, imagining the tiny infant enveloped in herbs, cloths, and whispered prayers. Visitors remain few. Women from the household check in, offering quiet support. They whisper reminders, rest frequently, nurse often, and accept the help of others. Men still linger outside, delivering food or firewood, their contributions practical but removed from the intimate care of birth. You sense that childbirth was a deeply female-centered experience, with male influence largely peripheral, if not absent entirely. The midwife observes the infant's first attempts at feeding, guiding the mother's hands, adjusting positioning, and ensuring a proper latch. Early nursing is crucial, not just for nourishment, but for immunity. Medieval people may not have understood antibodies, but they understood the importance of close contact and regular feeding, a knowledge passed down through generations. Even in this quiet, moments of superstition persist. A cloth may be tied above the crib, a charm placed nearby, or a whispered phrase recited over the baby. These rituals serve a dual purpose, protection and psychological reassurance. You notice how much these small acts comfort the mother, giving her a sense of agency in a world where so much is uncertain. As the morning progresses, the room's energy softens. The tension of labor gives way to vigilance, care, and cautious relief. You realize that childbirth in the medieval era is not just about delivering a baby, it's about recovery, protection, and the weaving of community support that ensures both mother and child have a fighting chance at life. Afternoon light spills through the slats of the shuttered windows, casting soft stripes across the room, and you notice a subtle change in the mother's breathing. She begins to relax more, lulled by the gentle routine of recovery and the hum of the household around her. The midwife sits beside her, fingers lightly brushing the baby's tiny hand, whispering guidance about breastfeeding, positioning, and warmth. These moments are almost meditative, a quiet aftermath of the storm that was labor. You realize how central observation is during these hours. The mother's pulse, color, and temperature are carefully monitored. Even small signs, shivering, paleness, a faltering appetite, could indicate infection, hemorrhage, or exhaustion. The midwife acts as both healer and sentinel, interpreting every gesture, every breath, every subtle shift in mood or movement. Her knowledge is tacit, accumulated through decades of experience and countless births. Historians still debate whether medieval midwives had any standardized methods or whether everything relied purely on individual expertise, but the results speak for themselves. Food remains a priority. Warm broth, enriched with herbs and honey, continues to flow, sometimes accompanied by lightly baked bread or soft grains. Nursing is frequent, both for the baby's nourishment and for the mother's stimulation of the womb. Some households provide a second nurse or female relative to help with feeding, freeing the mother to rest and recover. The emphasis on sustained nutrition and attention demonstrates an intuitive understanding of bodily needs, long before modern science could explain why they mattered. Amid the practical care, ritual continues. A sprig of rue might be tucked into the baby's swaddle, a small piece of iron hidden nearby, or a whispered blessing repeated in turns by each attendant. You notice how these customs blend superstition with psychological reassurance, offering comfort to mother and caregivers alike. The baby is surrounded by layers of protection, herbs, charms, prayers, an almost tactile manifestation of hope. The midwife occasionally instructs the mother on modest exercises, gentle pelvic movements, slow walking, and stretches to encourage circulation and aid recovery. You sense the delicate balance between activity and rest, each step informed by observation and tradition. In wealthier households, herbal baths may be prepared, meant to soothe, cleanse, and restore strength. You imagine the aroma of lavender or rosemary filling the room, mingling with the lingering smoke of candle and hearth. Visitors are still minimal, but the household's rhythm expands subtly. Women move quietly, tidying, fetching water, tending fires. Children may peek from the doorway, curious but kept at a distance. The atmosphere is calm yet vigilant, a careful equilibrium maintained to protect the fragile new life. You notice humor peeking in, soft and brief, like a shy sunbeam. One of the older women teases the mother about her dramatic cries, earning a weak smile in response. It's a small relief, a reminder that even in the midst of fear and fatigue, life persists with tiny moments of levity. Humor, like prayer or herbs, becomes part of the protective tapestry surrounding mother and child. By late afternoon, you see the baby slowly settling into the world, cooing faintly, eyes blinking in the dim light, while the mother watches, exhausted but alive. The midwife records no notes, keeps no official ledger, yet you understand that her knowledge will persist, embedded in memory and shared with the next generation. This cycle, birth, care, ritual, recovery, is continuous, repeating endlessly across centuries, shaping not just individual lives, but entire communities. Evening drapes itself over the village, softening the harsh edges of daylight. You feel the weight of hours pressing gently on the room, yet there's a quiet sense of accomplishment. The mother sits propped up with pillows, her body still tender, her hands tracing the baby's tiny limbs as if learning their shape for the first time. Every touch carries awe, gratitude, and a lingering fear. The memory of labor never quite leaves. The midwife moves among the group like a conductor, orchestrating care. She checks the mother's bleeding, presses lightly on her abdomen to ensure the womb is contracting properly, and fusses over the baby's swaddling. Herbs continue to play their part, a gentle fumigation with rosemary and lavender to cleanse the air. A small pouch of rue tucked near the mother to prevent fainting. You notice how these rituals, some practical, some symbolic, overlap seamlessly, forming a protective rhythm around mother and child. Historians still debate whether such measures were truly effective or served mostly to reassure the participants, yet their persistence speaks volumes about medieval thought. Attention turns briefly to the baby's first night. The cradle is arranged carefully, near the mother, with a small fire in the hearth casting a warm glow. Some households would sprinkle salt around the room to ward off evil spirits, others would hang a small charm over the crib. One quirky tradition you overhear involves placing a bell near the baby. The faint sound is believed to confuse malevolent entities and protect the infant from harm. It's both charming and slightly absurd, yet utterly sincere. The mother's family whispers, giving advice and recounting their own experiences. Older sisters or mothers share tips about latching, feeding, and soothing. Their voices carry warmth, caution, and sometimes laughter. One aunt jokes softly about how the baby's cries already rival her own childhood screams, prompting a tired but grateful giggle from the new mother. Humor, even subtle, stitches the tension into comfort. Meanwhile, the midwife offers instructions for the coming days. Watch the bleeding, feed frequently, rest often, and continue herbal teas. She reminds the family of the importance of keeping the baby close to maintain warmth and to prevent the infant from catching chills, a constant threat in medieval households. You notice how carefully these instructions are given, deliberate, gentle, and tailored to the specific needs of this mother and child. As night deepens, the room quiets except for the soft cooing of the baby and the occasional murmur from the mother. The midwife tidies herbs, rearranges the cradle, and makes sure a small lamp or candle remains alight. There is a tender choreography to the evening, maintaining vigilance while allowing rest, balancing care with quietude. You realize this delicate attention is as crucial as any act during labor itself. In this final stretch of the day, the interplay of superstition, observation, and experience is most evident. Prayers whispered, charms arranged, herbs applied, and tender instruction converge into a single purpose: to protect life in a precarious world. You sense that the real work of medieval childbirth extends far beyond the moment of birth. It is an ongoing act of care, love, and vigilant attention that continues long after the laboring cries fade. And as you sit in the dim light, listening to the gentle rhythm of breathing and the crackle of the fire, you understand that these quiet hours are as essential as the storm of labor that came before. Life has arrived, fragile yet persistent, cradled in a web of human skill, faith, and devotion. Night has fully fallen, and the household settles into a hushed rhythm. You notice the subtle sounds, the soft rustle of straw as the mother shifts, the tiny sighs of the baby wrapped snugly against her chest, and the occasional creak of the timber floorboards responding to the room's quiet activity. The midwife moves slowly, deliberately, checking blankets, feeling pulses, and whispering reassurances to both mother and infant. It is a choreography honed by centuries, an intimate dance of vigilance, care, and devotion. You observe how every detail matters. A stray draft from the window could chill the mother or infant, so blankets are tucked carefully. A nearby basin of warm water is kept ready for cleansing. Herbs, sprinkled in the corners or hanging above the bed, continue their dual role of protection and psychological comfort. A sprig of rosemary, a pinch of rue, a folded charm, all layered protections designed to soothe and guard against unseen dangers. Historians still debate whether these rituals were based in practical observation or largely superstition, but you can see how effectively they anchor the household's routine. Feeding continues, with the mother encouraged to nurse frequently. The midwife adjusts positioning, corrects the latch, and murmurs guidance, her voice soft yet authoritative. She demonstrates patience born of experience, a blend of intuition and learned knowledge, passed down through countless births. You notice the intricate balance: too much attention can overwhelm, too little could endanger. It's a dance of proximity, care, and timing, repeated in households across medieval Europe. The room is punctuated by occasional murmurs of encouragement from female relatives. Quiet jokes surface, teasing about the mother's groans, whispered comparisons to their own labors. Laughter is subtle but crucial, a way to relieve tension, assert shared experience, and remind everyone that even in perilous moments, life carries moments of levity. You notice how fatigue and vigilance intertwine. The midwife rests one eye on the mother, one on the baby, yet constantly scans the room for anything amiss. She adjusts blankets, fans the fire, checks the infant's color, and whispers protective words. These are the final, delicate hours of the birthing process, the transition from crisis to steady care. Every movement is intentional, every decision a small intervention in a precarious world. Quirky traditions continue into the night. A small bell rings intermittently, placed near the infant to confuse spirits. A ribbon from a saint's relic might brush the baby's swaddling. Perhaps it sounds absurd in modern eyes, yet these customs provide tangible reassurance in a world where survival is never guaranteed. Every gesture, practical or symbolic, reinforces the fragile bond between life and protection, as the night deepens, a calm settles. The fire burns low, shadows stretch along the walls, and the mother, finally able to relax, holds her infant close. You realize that medieval childbirth is not a single moment of exertion but a continuum, a series of trials, care, and rituals extending well beyond the initial birth. It is labor, supervision, superstition, and devotion interwoven to give life the best possible chance, and in this quiet room, you understand that childbirth in the medieval era is an act of endurance, skill, and collective care. Mothers, midwives, attendants, and even the faintest whisper of prayer or the smallest herb all combine to navigate the delicate boundary between danger and survival. Life is fragile, but it persists, cradled in the hands of those who know how to protect it. The room has quieted completely now, save for the soft, even breathing of mother and infant. You notice how the tension that gripped the chamber has dissolved into a gentle, almost imperceptible rhythm. The fire burns low, its glow warm against the cool night air filtering through the shutters, and shadows stretch lazily across the walls. There is a softness here that feels almost sacred, the delicate hum of life settling into a fragile pattern. You can picture the mother's hands, tired yet tender, tracing the outline of her child's tiny body. Every movement is slow, deliberate, and filled with a mixture of awe, relief, and cautious vigilance. The midwife remains close, a quiet sentinel. Her hands rested but ready, her knowledge an invisible thread connecting past, present, and future. Even the smallest gestures, the fluffing of a blanket, the soft adjustment of swaddling, carry weight, a silent promise of care and protection. Outside the room, the village is muted, the hustle of daily life paused, allowing a small sanctuary of stillness to persist. You imagine the scent of herbs lingering in the air, the faint smoke of the hearth curling upward, and the hushed whispers of gratitude and relief. The world beyond these walls is uncertain and often harsh, but here, for now, there is only warmth, vigilance, and the fragile miracle of life secured. You notice how time itself seems to slow. Each breath, each blink, each heartbeat stretches longer, marked by an awareness of fragility and endurance. The trials of labor, the anxieties of survival, and the weight of centuries of custom now fade into a gentle backdrop. You can almost feel the centuries of women who came before, whose knowledge and ritual created this very moment, their echoes woven into every gesture. In this final hush, you understand that medieval childbirth is more than pain and danger. It is continuity, devotion, and an intricate choreography of care that extends beyond the moment of birth. It is the weaving of experience, ritual, and vigilance into the soft fabric of human resilience. And as you watch mother and infant resting, you feel a slow, comforting exhale, a quiet reassurance that life, fragile, precious, and miraculous, endures.